I'm Julie Legg, author of The Missing Piece and diagnosed with ADHD at 52. Welcome to ADH Difference. Today I'll be speaking to London-based ADHD coach Lawrence Pratt. We'll be talking about ADHD goals and how coaching can really help us overcome some ADHD challenges. With long waiting times, in the UK especially, you don't need to be diagnosed really to reap the rewards of some one-on-one coaching sessions. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Lovely to see you again, Julie. How are you?
Yeah, very, very well. Spring has just sprung in New Zealand, whereas has autumn hit the UK?
Do you know what? I was actually thinking this myself last night. I was taking my dog Coconut for a walk last night, and it was about 8 o'clock and it was getting dark. And I thought, oh, there we go. That's the summer gone. So yes, it's on its way, the autumn.
It changes pretty quickly, doesn't it? The seasons can change quite rapidly.
Yeah, yeah.
As
It's yeah, particularly where you just notice it when, because that was the first walk that I took him out in the evening, that it was starting to get dark. I've got used to taking him out in the nice evening sunshine, but there you go. I do like this changing of the seasons. I'm not too mournful of summer going. It's a chance for nice jumpers to come out. So
it's a win-win all round, I say.
yeah,
But thank you so much for coming on board. Now, you're an ADHD coach in the UK, and you
that's
also
correct.
have ADHD yourself, which
Indeed, yeah.
from an ADHDer is music to my ears. I have had experience with therapy counseling with a
Hmm.
non-ADHDer, being undiagnosed myself at the time, and really struggling to see what seemed quite rational suggestions just weren't resonating with me. So it's fabulous. There is a ADHD coach for ADHDers. Now, I would love if you'd like to share your own personal ADHD journey.
Yeah, so I wasn't diagnosed as a child or anything like that, and I wouldn't have said, with my experience of what I thought ADHD to be, I wouldn't have said I presented it in that way either. But I mean, I'm 42 now, and I suppose in my mid 30s, I unfortunately got divorced, and I would probably say that it was at that point in my life that I first started to sort of examine myself and to wonder why certain things had caused certain challenges, in relationships and things like that. But in my working career, I suppose, is where I experienced most of my challenges. I was burning out a lot, and so. I at some point I went to have some therapy because um, procrastination was a big issue for me. So I had gone back to work after the divorce, and um, I had I had wanted to do other things, but I went back to the same job, and all that time I was kind of saying to myself, oh, there's a whole bunch of projects that I would quite like to do. I mean, I was a UX designer for 12 years, and if I explain what that is, that's user experience. So if you think about a website or an app or anything really where a customer uses something, they get an experience, and it's the company's objective to try and improve that experience. And it was my job
Mm.
to research with the user, ask questions, find out what the challenges are, and then design a solution for it. So I'm seeding a little idea there as to why that might come useful later on.
Yes.
But anyway, I was in the digital space, so I had, we live in a digital world now where we can make money online. So I thought, oh, I've got all these ideas that I would like to pursue, and because I wasn't necessarily enjoying it as much as I used to in my job, I was saying, well, this would make my life better if I could work for myself and do X, Y, and Z. Um, but I couldn't find a way to make that happen, and I was feeling quite depressed and everything like that. And so I went to the therapist and said, "Can you help me out working through this procrastination issue? I want to figure out why I can't do the things that I want to do." And it was suggested to me then that I had ADHD, but I didn't know what ADHD was. My only experience of it was, what we hear about, American kids, boys, who are disruptive. And I thought, no, that's not me. And I poo-pooed it. And but it was only a little bit later on when various family members had sort of looked into it, and I was looking into it for uh, people close to me, and a few lights switched on in terms of, and bells rang, and I was like, ah. And to use a very useful quote, I found the missing piece.
Oh, goodness me. And that's a good one. That's a great title for a book, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I'd read it.
Oh,
And
that
so, yeah, so I mean, then a lot of things became clear essentially, because as I mentioned, as a designer, I was always, I had adapted previously. I had adapted a design thinking methodology. That I went to San Francisco for a holiday, and I went to Silicon Valley, and I went to some meetups, and I went to this meetup that had design thinking for life, and I had at that point got the idea of, oh well, yeah, all the things I use for design could work in designing little workarounds for challenges that you had, but this was all before I knew about the ADHD. So I had already been investigating it. I was already working along this path, but I don't know about you, but when you sort of focus on one little aspect of your life, that's useful, but you ignore everything else, and it's like whack-a-mole. That what you think you've sorted one thing out, and another one pops up somewhere else. And the way I resonate with your book title, The Missing Piece, is it was when I've realized that the ADHD was really an umbrella for everything. It then allowed me to change my focus. It wasn't necessarily just focus on this and focus on that. It's like they're all connected, and you need to start looking at the way your brain works and how that affects your decision making. And only if you're sort of looking at it as a whole are you going to have any sort of chance of making significant improvements. So that was it in a nutshell.
I completely agree, and especially about the interconnectedness with our traits.
Mm.
You seldom would you have passion without some sort of impulsiveness creeping in, or overthinking and procrastination, or um, hyper focus and limited focus in some areas. It all works together, and it can be really confusing when you don't understand your brain and you don't know why you
Hmm.
do these things. So what age were you diagnosed, Lawrence?
It was a couple of years ago.
Fabulous.
So I'm 42 now. I had to work that out for yeah, so 40. Yeah, yeah,
For those watching, I will just introduce Coconut, who has just sat on the couch behind you.
yeah. He
Glorious
may- he
little dog.
may he may wander around and show you a bit more, but at the minute he seems content where he is.
Brilliant. Now, so diagnosed and having your UX experience for quite some
Hmm.
time, when did you decide to become an ADHD coach? Was it a natural progression?
Uh, yes. So, yeah. I mean, you probably recognize this trait in terms of hyper focus. Once you get your claws into something, you want to know everything about it. And like I say, I had this. Coming from an angle of design, I had like an enthusiasm to approach it in that way. And you mentioned the word a moment or two ago about passion, and I found, I mentioned earlier that I had a few projects that I wanted to sort of almost tick off my list. I would have said that had a passion for all of those things. Um, but one thing that I think maybe trumps passion is the feeling of purpose.
Mm.
And when I left my job last year, I gave myself some time to try some of these projects that I wanted to do, and I set them up and got them started. But I realized that whilst I was passionate about them, um, dividing my time up for towards them didn't really give me any satisfaction. And one thing that I had lost previously with my old job was a sense of purpose. I mean, I was working as a UX designer, and we were a small agency that helped independent hotels and in the travel industry. But all my clients were people that worked for a company, so you're helping them, and you're making experiences better for their customers, but there was no sense of purpose, and I wasn't changing the world in any fantastic way. And the people that I was working for, no, not the people I was working for, the clients, they might leave their job and work at another place in 2 years' time. So there was no real sense of achievement that I could identify as purposeful. And so what I'm trying to say is when I found out about the ADHD, and I looked into coaching, and I felt that I had built up this experience in what I could see as designing solutions for challenges. I felt I could really throw myself into this, and like I say, I think then I found a purpose. When you can work one to
Mm.
one with somebody, and actually, you see when they arrive, they're coming to you because they don't know what else to do. They've had all these challenges all their lives. It's very, very difficult time for them, and then to see them take a bit more control back, and controlling that chaos, I mean, if that doesn't give you satisfaction, then I don't know what will. So,
Yeah,
um, I would like to say that I finally feel like I've found my purpose.
that is brilliant. And what an amazing
Yeah.
feeling that is, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, so you're based in the UK, you're a certified ADHD coach,
Yeah.
and you go by the name of ADHD Goals,
Yes. Yeah.
which to me is self-explanatory, but I think
Yeah.
it's marvelous because at the end of the day, coaching is about achieving goals, isn't it? It's
Hmm.
not it's not necessarily therapy that a counselor or a psychologist may work on. You're actually looking at achievable goals. What are your clients coming to you with? What would you say is one of the top two goals if you were to average them out? Are they coming to you because they struggle with time management, or is it trying to achieve a certain task that's been on their hit list for a while? What sort of things may they come to you for?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does vary. So they might come to me with one specific challenge that is at the top of their list. But as we sort of discussed before, the interconnectedness of
Mm,
ADHD means that it's highly unlikely that that's the only thing that they're finding difficult. And as we go through, so my program goes through the executive functioning framework. So you kind of highlight that there's the challenges are showing themselves in other areas as well. But I mean, I would say that most people are start off with saying that it's challenging at work, and this could be because they are newly aware of the fact that they've got ADHD, and
mm,
and there's this fear of disclosing at work, and trying to find ways of communicating that. Or now that they have disclosed, people are they've got this sense of people sort of treating them a little bit different, and they feel like they're in the hot seat of being in charge of figuring out what it is that they need. And I think, the challenging thing is if somebody's just found out that they've got ADHD, they don't necessarily know what is going to help them. So, going to work and disclosing, and then the company, if they're not well versed with dealing with these sorts of processes, then they push it back on you, and they don't really know what it is that they should suggest to them that would help them, and it's
Yeah.
really difficult. And if we think about RSD and rejection, it makes it more challenging once they have disclosed, to feel that trying to get people to understand what ADHD is and what will help can be quite difficult in that time where everything's up in the air a little bit for them.
Absolutely. So are your clients coming to you newly diagnosed? Is that the kind of the time frame, newly diagnosed, wondering where to start, have a few areas in their life that they want to improve? Is that the time that they would come to you?
Yeah, it seems that is the general way it's happening at the moment, and I think that doesn't surprise me, because well, not only because of my own journey, but the waiting times to get diagnosed on the NHS. I mean, there are different routes you can take if you go privately. Depending on where you are in the country, it can be anything from 2 to 8 years, and so people are
That
trying to figure. It's insane. It's insane, isn't it? I mean, we've got a new government now, so there has been talk of them trying to improve the situation, but things take time, so I don't know how well that will go.
no,
But
I get 2 to 8 years is just outrageous. Um, I would suspect potentially you would have clients coming to you undiagnosed, but on their journey nonetheless, perhaps resonating with ADHD traits and not being able to wait for a diagnosis, but seeking help anyway. Yeah, I can
oh
imagine.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Sorry. I'm grouping I'm grouping those in the same bucket, I suppose.
yeah, yeah.
I
Mm,
think so. My opinion is that if you have got to the point where you are feeling challenged in any way in any aspect of your life, so challenged to the point where you think you need help, then you want to do something about it. And I think with the way I think about ADHD, a lot of the executive functioning challenges that we have is due to. So if you have ADHD biologically, you biologically don't have the same number of dopamine receptors that are filling up your little daily tank of dopamine that is the juice for your executive functions. And so um, you need help where you can either manage that with medication, but you wouldn't get access to that if you haven't got diagnosed. So you
mm,
need to find a more holistic way of managing that dopamine through exercise, morning sunlight, things like that, diet,
mm.
and everything like that. But even if you had medication, pills don't give you skills. You still are going to have challenges with going about doing tasks that involve your executive functions, and I provide a framework to do that. But I'm slightly losing my thread. Oh, yes, that's it. So the dopamine aspect. I think we live in a society nowadays where the environment that we live in, we are we are trashing our dopamine baseline levels. Um, just by spending so much time looking at our scrolling through our phones, sitting on the sofa watching the next episode on Netflix. We're seeing people less and less. People are becoming more and more isolated. And people's diets aren't necessarily always great, with sugary foods and everything. And what that means is that we are having so many quick spikes of dopamine that it's almost when you give a child one of those really naughty sugary drinks, they go zoop, straight up
Mm,
hyperactive. But what comes after that is a big crash, and that
mm,
crash is lower, and overall what it's doing, it's bringing down your dopamine baseline level. And so
mm,
what I'm trying to say is there may be a lot of people that don't have biological ADHD. They're not wired in the same way, but they are having a diminished dopamine baseline, and that
mm.
would also display what looks like ADHD symptoms. So whether you are ADHD biologically, or you're experiencing ADHD symptoms, still the coaching that I would do would help. So I think that's something that we might experience a little bit more and more as we go along.
Brilliant. So, if I was a first-time client meeting you, Lawrence, what if someone's not really familiar with seeing a coach? Tell me, walk me through what they could expect. Is it in person? Is it online? What's the process from a client's
Yeah.
perspective? What can they expect?
So first of all, we would arrange. It's online, so as we are talking now, this is how we would conduct our sessions. And the first one would be just a free call for half an hour to just discuss why it is that you've brought yourself to the situation that you feel that there's some challenges that you're facing. So we would discuss what those challenges are, and then I would just sort of give an overview of what the coaching looks like, what the framework looks like, and what you can expect from the tools and exercises. And then we would start and we'd book in some sessions. Obviously, a few sessions is going to be more effective than just one session, so it would at least four. But 4, 6, 12, however many, you're not tied into any specific, it's not forever. The idea is to give you the tools to be able to feel confident to address the challenges yourself in the future. So I tend to start off with two specific sessions, and I'll explain the reason for that. And the first one is a strengths assessment. So you would fill out a form, and it would identify what your strengths are. And the second the second session would be a very similar thing, but it would be identifying your saboteurs. And so that's identifying the ways in which you like to learn, or the way that you digest information, and what your passions are. And the other things are the things that tend to be tripping you up. And the reason I do those two first is because this helps us to understand how you operate. And by knowing what those are, what's the top of those lists, it gives us a good idea of what we might need to think about when we
Mm.
come to design a solution for any particular challenge. We say, well, you're more likely to go and want to tackle this like that, but then this is going to rear its head. So it's very interesting, almost like Lego bricks. When we talk about some of the challenges that come up later on in the sessions, it might be that one of those saboteurs becomes one of our friends, because you might need one saboteur to be helpful in sort of tricking you out of doing the thing that's actually stopping you from doing that specific challenge. So really understanding that about yourself is very useful moving forward, in terms of being able to identify ways forward.
I love that approach, and particularly when you talk about strengths, because I think when you're newly diagnosed, depending on your state of mind and how you're feeling, whether you feel validated or feeling grief and anger, which is often a common response as well, to highlight some of those strengths, I think is a beautiful process because I believe we all do have strengths, and sometimes we just need to dig around a little to find them. But
Hmm.
certainly, those strengths we can lean on, and even subconsciously has got us through survival to this point, if you know what I mean. Whether it's just strength or just tenacity or passion or whatever it may be. So that's a wonderful thing. You're not just looking at negative problems, but you're using the yin and the yang to work
Hmm.
together, and then customizing that for that client. So it's not a paint by numbers. You're looking at the client's goals and you're looking at their personal strengths. And again, ADHD isn't a one size fits all disorder. So what
Hmm.
may be a strength for one isn't for the other person. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing you're doing. And you're certified, which is a lovely word to hear as well, Lawrence,
Hmm.
because several years ago when I was looking just after my diagnosis, it was a bit flimsy as to what qualifications an ADHD
Hmm.
coach could have. And pretty
Hmm.
much at the time, and so we're talking 3 years ago, even in New Zealand, it was pretty, you know,
Yeah.
well, you need qualifications to be a therapist or a counselor even, but a coach wasn't so. So I'm delighted that each country potentially has their own standardization now, I think, maybe peer
Yeah.
regulated. But it really
Yeah.
gives confidence to those ADHD clients coming through that you know what you're talking about. And it's not just a chin wag session. You're there to give really genuine advice and to help them, really resolve their own challenges. It's
Hmm.
absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. And I also I mentioned about the sort of the free call that I do at the beginning. That's
Mm,
also to identify that's not to just say, oh great, I've got a new client. It's just to say, what are your challenges? And if I thought, oh, this sounds a bit more like there's a lot more going on, and this person probably ought to see a therapist about something else, then it's an opportunity to do that. It's not simply to just get people through the door. It's to check that coaching is the right thing for them as well.
that is absolutely wonderful. Lawrence, thank you so much for taking your time this morning, to chat to me and ADHD difference. And you'll be an amazing success, and people will be very, very lucky to have you as their coach. So thank
Oh,
you.
oh, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure chatting to you again.